Have you ever wondered why society is so obsessed with ranking people? Alphas lead, betas follow, sigmas walk alone. But what about the man who doesn't just walk? He runs in the opposite direction. He doesn't merely reject the social hierarchy. He refuses to exist within it. They don't simply rebel against the system, because rebellion implies they still care what the system thinks. That's the zeta male, not just outside the system, but almost against it. A sigma might step away from the crowd, but a zeta doesn't even acknowledge that a crowd ever existed. At its core, the sigma male is still playing the game, just on his own terms. He avoids traditional dominance hierarchies, yet operates within the framework of success. He values independence, solitude, and self-sufficiency, but he still engages with the world when necessary. He is the lone wolf who roams in shadows. The zeta male takes it further. They are the tiger, indifferent and solitary by instinct. Where the sigma disengages strategically, the zeta disengages entirely, not just from people, but from the system itself. Ever notice how some men ask for permission before they act? Not you. While others debate, calculate, and hesitate, you've already moved. There's something unsettling about a man who doesn't need the world's approval to function. Society expects negotiation, compromise, the dance of social validation. But zetas operate from a different frequency entirely. Marcus Aurelius understood this when he wrote that the universe is within us. For zetas, this isn't philosophy, it's instinct. You don't consult the crowd, because the crowd operates on borrowed thinking. They mistake consensus for truth, popularity for wisdom. You've learned that waiting for permission is just another form of mental slavery. A 2019 study by Baumeister on self-determination found that individuals who act from internal motivation show higher cognitive resilience and lower anxiety rates. The research revealed something the ancient Stoics already knew. External validation creates dependency. Internal conviction creates power. Alphas chase the crown. Betas follow the script. Sigmas, they carve their own path through the wilderness beside the main road. Clever, independent, but still, they know the road exists. They glance at the map. They play a different game, but it's still a game. For zetas, the road is irrelevant. They build their own road, by instinct. They don't even recognize the road others built. They make the rules. Is it narcissism? It might be, but it is what it is. This isn't solitude, it's erasure, the workforce, a hamster wheel designed to grind souls into currency, relationships, contracts fraught with hidden clauses and inevitable decay, social norms, arbitrary rules whispered by ghosts. To engage is to validate the illusion. Most men live in constant negotiation with reality. They ask, will this work? What will they think? Is this the right time? Zetas don't escape reality. They sharpen their edge inside it. When everyone else is calculating risk, you're already testing solutions. This isn't recklessness. It's the recognition that action reveals truth faster than analysis reveals certainty. The world moves too slowly for minds that operate without external friction. For zetas, the problem isn't whether to act. The problem is irrelevant once you've already begun. They call it dangerous. You call it efficient. Do you feel purpose whispering in your bones and wonder if it's a call or a chain? You're driven by an inner fire that refuses to cool, but sometimes that flame scorches the path beneath your feet. You don't chase goals. You obliterate them, only to forge new ones from ash. That relentless pursuit isn't progress. It's a crucible that forges obsession. Nietzsche wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow, yet you twist that why until it bears down on you." You operate from raw instinct. You see each challenge as a test you designed yourself. Sun Tzu shows that strategy begins with knowing yourself, but you go further. You become the battlefield. You are both soldier and terrain. When you strike, it's from within as much as without. Here, in the heat of your making, you find clarity. You act not because maps guide you, but because your internal compass burns with its own magnetism. But beware forging purpose into a chain. When meaning becomes demand, you risk becoming your own jailer. You are a force that builds and destroys in the same breath, a living paradox that reminds the world purpose is as dangerous as it is powerful. Do you ever feel like everyone around you is performing in a play they forgot was fiction? The whole world is a stage, and most actors have forgotten their acting. They chase promotions that mean nothing, relationships that drain everything, and pleasures that satisfy nothing. Zetas see through this elaborate performance because they've stepped outside the theater entirely. Diogenes understood this when he masturbated in public and told peoples that if only hunger could be satisfied by rubbing the belly. He wasn't being crude. You don't have to do that. He was exposing the absurdity of social pretense. While society gasps at authenticity, you recognize that most social norms are just collective delusions dressed up as wisdom. Sigmas still perform on the same stage. They just choose better roles. The Sigma might become the greatest duelist. The Zeta abandons the duel. Consider Miyamoto Musashi, not just as the undefeated swordsman, but after his final duel. He walked away from combat, from fame, from the very identity of the best. He sought mastery through solitude. Victory lies in rendering the battlefield obsolete within his own mind. Modern existentialists like Sartre discovered what Zetas know instinctively. Existence precedes essence. You are not what society tells you to be. If Zetas had a philosophy, MGTOW is closest to it. Still, it's just a movement ran by weak men, fearing women. Zetas also reject that. You've transcended both seeking and avoiding. Hedonism is just another cage with prettier bars, while others chase dopamine hits through consumption, sex, or status. You've realized that pleasure-seeking is just pain avoidance in disguise. The man who needs nothing cannot be controlled by anything. They call it nihilism. You call it clarity. Ever noticed how uncomfortable people get when you don't fill the silence? Most men are terrified of quiet because silence reveals truth, and truth is usually unbearable. They fill every pause with noise, every gap with words, every moment of reflection with distraction. You've learned that silence is not emptiness. It's concentrated power. Miyamoto Musashi spent years in mountain caves, not speaking, not seeking, just existing in pure awareness. When he finally emerged, his sword moved with the precision of a man who had listened to the universe's deeper rhythms. His opponents fell not because he was faster, but because he had learned to act from stillness rather than react from noise. Sigmas use strategic silence to influence conversations and gain leverage. They observe, read their psychology. But you don't use silence. You are the silence itself. You're silent by instinct that shows dominance and power. The difference is profound. One is wisdom, the other is divine presence. A 2018 neurological study by Bernardi on silence and brain activity found that 2 minutes of silence stimulates more neural growth than any form of music or noise. The brain literally rebuilds itself in quiet. While others fear the void, you understand that emptiness is where creation begins. Society demands constant communication because silence threatens the illusion of connection. They mistake words for understanding, noise for engagement, chatter for intimacy. You've discovered that most conversations are just two people taking turns being unheard. In a world drowning in meaningless noise, your silence becomes a blade, because quiet truth always wounds louder than screaming lies. Have you ever locked eyes with your own ambition and wondered if it was just another mirage? You see the world chasing visions painted by others. You shatter them with a glance. Illusions of purpose feel like shackles. You'd rather stare into emptiness than wear borrowed dreams. MGTOW guys stepping off the love labor treadmill, but this movement is just about men fearing women that they will take everything. Zeta burns the whole factory down. Nietzsche warned of the abyss, but you turned away when it whispered comfort. Diogenes threw away his cup to prove simplicity. You discard your goals to unmask the void beneath desire. Studies on existential clarity by Reynolds 2022 found that those who strip away all external aims often forge resilience so raw it borders on paranoia. Miyamoto Musashi mastered 2 swords, then put them down to write the Book of 5 Rings. You go further. You bury the need for any sword. Your Sigma shadow sketches, blueprints for empires in silence. You erase the canvas itself. In this moment of naked sight, you become your own horizon. You wield stoicism like an automatic defense. Pain and pleasure pass by like weather on barren rock. But beware. When every vision dissolves, you risk nothing left to guide you but the echo of your own doubt. You are both creator and eraser, and in that paradox, you redefine what it means to see. What happens when suffering stops being something that happens to you and becomes something you transform? Most men run from pain like children fleeing shadows, not realizing they're being chased by their own weakness. They medicate, distract, numb, and avoid, turning temporary discomfort into permanent dysfunction. You've learned to alchemize suffering into strength, not because you enjoy pain, but because you refuse to be destroyed by what's inevitable. Marcus Aurelius faced plague, betrayal, and the weight of an empire crumbling in his hands. His response wasn't to seek comfort, but to forge his character in the furnace of adversity. The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it. You don't just endure hardship. You extract its lessons like a miner extracting gold from stone. Sigmas use pain strategically, learning from setbacks to optimize their approach. They analyze failure, adjust tactics, and return stronger. You operate from a different frequency entirely. You don't learn from pain, you become it. The suffering doesn't teach you resilience. It reveals the resilience that was always there. Nietzsche understood this when he declared that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but he missed the deeper truth. What doesn't kill you reveals that you were already unbreakable. The pain doesn't create your strength. It strips away everything that was hiding it. A 2020 study by Tedeschi on post-traumatic growth found that individuals who fully process adversity show increased psychological resilience and expanded worldview. But you've gone beyond processing pain. You've learned to metabolize it directly. While others seek pleasure to escape suffering, you've realized that avoiding pain is just another form of imprisonment. Freedom isn't the absence of chains. It's the ability to break them whenever they appear. Have you ever realized that most people's morality is just borrowed programming they never questioned? Society hands out moral codes like instruction, expecting everyone to follow the same script written by people who died centuries ago. They worship rules without understanding their origins, follow commandments without examining their logic. You've stepped outside and begun crafting your own ethical framework based on direct experience rather than ancient authority. Nietzsche proclaimed the death of God, not to celebrate chaos, but to announce that humans must now become their own moral architects. While others ask, "What should I do?" you ask, "What principles will I live by?" The difference is profound. One seeks permission, the other claims sovereignty. Sigmas bend existing moral systems to their advantage, finding loopholes in social contracts to maximize their position. They're still playing within someone else's game, just more cleverly. You've rejected the entire game board because you understand that all external moral systems are ultimately forms of control, disguised as guidance. Diogenes scandalized Athens not because he was immoral, but because his morality came from within rather than from social consensus. When asked what wine he liked best, he replied someone else's. A 2017 study by Haidt on moral foundations revealed that individuals who create personal ethical systems show higher cognitive flexibility and lower susceptibility to groupthink. But you've gone beyond personal ethics. You've learned to operate from moral instinct rather than moral rules. This terrifies society because a man with his own moral universe is unpredictable, uncontrollable, and ultimately ungovernable. They prefer slaves who think they're free to free men who know they're responsible. What's the difference between a man who chooses to be alone and a man who's simply lonely? Most men confuse solitude with loneliness because they've never learned to be comfortable in their own presence. They fill every silence with noise, every empty moment with distraction, every pause with people. They're so afraid of meeting themselves that they become addicted to external stimulation just to avoid the confrontation. Seneca spent years in exile, not as punishment, but as education. All cruelty springs from weakness, he wrote. Understanding that the cruelest thing you can do to most men is leave them alone with their thoughts. You've made peace with that internal wilderness that terrifies others. Sigmas use solitude strategically, withdrawing to recharge and plan their next social maneuvers. Their alone time is preparation for engagement. Your solitude isn't preparation for anything. It's completion in itself. You don't retreat to gather strength. You retreat because strength, when nobody else is around to dilute it. The MGTOW movement grasps fragments of this truth when they withdraw from romantic entanglements, but they're still running from something rather than moving toward themselves. They've confused avoiding women with embracing solitude. You've transcended both the need for others and the need to avoid them. Miyamoto Musashi's Dakoto teaches the way of walking alone. Do not seek pleasure for its own sake, he wrote. Understanding that solitude becomes unbearable only when you're constantly seeking what's missing rather than appreciating what's present. You've learned to find completeness in incompleteness. 2019 study by Copeland found that chosen solitude increases creativity, reduces anxiety, and enhances self-awareness, while forced isolation produces the opposite effects. The key isn't being alone. It's choosing to be alone from a position of strength rather than weakness. Society calls this antisocial. You recognize it as the most social thing possible, finally learning to have a meaningful relationship with yourself. How often do you think about death? And when you do you feel fear or freedom? Most men live as if death is a distant rumor, not an approaching certainty. They build elaborate fantasies about permanence, accumulating possessions they can't take, relationships they can't preserve, achievements that will be forgotten. You've stared directly into the void and discovered something liberating. Nothing matters enough to justify the anxiety they carry. Marcus Aurelius kept a skull on his desk, not out of morbidity, but as a reminder that death smiles at us all, but all a man can do is smile back. You've internalized this truth so completely that it's transformed your relationship with everything. Zetas use something called death anxiety. Who will remember them after death, for good or for bad? This is where sigmas and zetas overlap. Socrates drank his hemlock with curiosity, not resignation. When asked if he feared death, he replied that it was either dreamless sleep or a journey to meet great minds. Either option seemed preferable to the prison of ignorant certainty most men call living. You've adopted this same philosophical courage. The Stoics practiced memento mori not to become depressed, but to become free. When you truly accept that everything ends, you stop clinging to things that were never permanent. This isn't nihilism. It's the ultimate form of detachment that allows you to engage fully without being enslaved by outcomes. A study in 2021 by Vail on terror management theory found that individuals who've processed mortality, salience showed decreased materialism and increased focus on intrinsic values. It's not about anxiety of death, but you've transformed it into existential clarity. While others fear the end, you've learned to see death as the ultimate validation that nothing they're chasing was ever worth the chase. Life becomes exponentially more meaningful when you're not desperately trying to make it last forever. What happens when a man becomes so internally complete that the external world loses all power to define him? This is where the journey ends and the real existence begins. You've transcended the need for validation, rejected borrowed morality, weaponized silence, transformed pain into power, and stared death in the face without blinking. What emerges from this crucible isn't just a different kind of man. It's a force that society has no framework to understand or control. Nietzsche wrote about the Übermensch, the man who creates his own values after the death of God. But even Nietzsche couldn't have imagined what you've become, a being so self-contained that you operate like a natural force rather than a herd. You don't simply rebel against the system because rebellion implies you still care what the system thinks. You break it down to pieces and make your own rules. Miyamoto Musashi achieved this state when he wrote, "Do not let yourself be guided by the feeling of lust or love, not because these emotions are evil, but because being guided by anything external makes you predictable, and predictable men can be controlled." Sigmas still exist within the paradigm of power, influence, and social dynamics. They're master players in a game you've forgotten how to lose. When someone operates completely outside the framework of cause and effect, they become what philosophers call an absolute. Diogenes achieved this when Alexander the Great himself came seeking wisdom, only to be told to step aside because he was blocking sunlight. The most powerful man in the world had no power over a man who needed nothing the world could offer. You've become the storm that doesn't announce itself, the earthquake that strikes without warning, the wildfire that burns according to its own logic, not because you're destructive, but because you're utterly unpredictable to minds that operate on the assumption that all men want something they can withhold. They can't control what they can't understand. They can't predict what operates beyond, and they can't defeat what was never fighting them in the first place. Thanks for watching. Now watch the next video appearing right side of your screen. Thanks. Hope you'll like it.